Hello and welcome to another season of Vulcans Football 2015. Once again, I'm your host, Gary Smith. I'm joined, as always, by California Sports Information Director Matt Kiefer. Matt, summer's over. We're in full swing right now.
The Cal Vulcan football did not waste any time on Saturday getting into the swing of the season, that's for sure. If you went in there late to the game or went to get something to drink, you missed a touchdown pretty quick.
Well, a lot of teams, it seems like first game of the year, they run a draw, run a fullback dive or something just to get off and running. Not the California Vulcans. First play, about an 80-yard touchdown pass from James Harris. So I think the first touchdown was to Quan Scott, but great aerial attack by the Vulcans on Saturday.
I mean, it's one of those things. James Harris and Kawan Scott, Gary Brown on the outside, both returned this year, and you can tell they really didn't. They picked right off where they left off from last year. James Harris threw for about 400 yards. Both wideouts went for over 100. That's a pretty good first half. Basically, is all they ended up doing with throwing the attack on offense there. In the second half, a lot more toned down offense, is trying to get out of there without any injuries, given the season opener and given the heat. But definitely impressive for the Vulcans. A great way to start the season. You always want to start off 1-0.
And it was kind of an interesting game to start the season because Virginia State coming into this year, California played Virginia State last year in the game. They had, I think, 19 lightning delays. But it was a hard-fought game. California won by a few scores. Virginia State was a team that made the NCAA Division II playoffs last year, had a lot of starters coming back, but a new head coach. In California, on the other hand, a lot of starters coming back on both sides of the ball, but not a lot of depth, so he wasn't sure. And plus the long drive. I mean, going 7 hours, 6 hours in a bus, even though you stayed the night before, you're on the road, first game of the year in front of a hostile crowd. That's a tough task, especially against a team that was as good as last year's Virginia State.
I mean, last year, Virginia State ended up losing that game, but they went on a run and won the CIAA championship for the first time, I think in 20-some years, and they made the playoffs for the first time ever. So they were building off a lot of momentum. Their coach, using that momentum, left and took another job, and they hired what they thought's a great candidate for them. But you bring back your quarterback, running back, a couple wide receivers. It doesn't matter who your new head coach is, new OC is. You think you're going to put up some points. But the Cal defense really shut them down. Last year was a sort of I think there was almost 50 points in the first half between the two teams. Virginia State really struggled to get anything going. One score was on a trick play. Another one was late in the game when the result was already decided. So you look at it from a defensive perspective from Cal, they really stepped up their game and played Virginia State really tough and showed that the offense just doesn't have to carry this team this year. Defense is going to be able to do some things as well.
Well, on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, I made the comment at halftime to our announcers on radio. The tackles are going to get the quarterback errors killed for Virginia State because it just seemed like California was pinning the tackles back and we're putting pressure on the quarterback each and every snap.
I think it's one of those things you look at going into the year, the strength of the defense was the safeties. They had three of their top players on defense coming back, all played the safety position. So you knew the secondary is going to be strong, so you're going to have more time to rush the passer because there's not going to be a whole lot of things open. But then you put Juwan Turner, who was an all-conference player, mostly at DN last year. You put him on the inside with Adam Mahuchi and Tyler Haddock. That's a heck of a D tackle threesome there. Turner can go to the outside at any time if he wants during basically passing plays. You have Earl Brewster, Jordan Lardani on the outside as well. That's a heck of a defensive front for any O-line, same five guys, because O-lines don't really rotate as much as D-lines do. That's a tough task for five guys to hold that quality of defensive line up all day, and then you got the secondary playing the way they're capable of. It could make for a long day for some offenses in the PSAC.
I tell you what, that game was basically over about 7 minutes into the first half. To paint the picture, California kicked off Virginia State, I believe it was 3 and out, and then a punt, and then the 90-yard touchdown pass. Then Virginia State won on a little bit of a drive, but key 4th down and 4 inside the 20-yard line. California's defense stiffens, and then 2 plays later, Gary Brown on a bubble screen just made it looked like the defense for Virginia State was in slow motion. It was almost like he had a nice turbo boost on a video game because he just pulled away from the defensive backs on that bubble screen.
I mean, Gary Brown before the year was a preseason All-American after his breakout year last year, and it's understandable why. But it is one of those things going into the game. You know him and Kawan Scott, they both have breakaway game-changing speed. As a secondary, you got to not let those guys get behind you very often. So you think, okay, bubble screens I can keep in front of me. Well, they also have enough juke moves that they can go and take it to the house. Gary Brown showcased those kind of skills at Mercier's last year, too, when he broke the school record. With this game on Saturday, it was the first wideout in school history with 2 200-yard games. That's a nice couple-week stretch for some wide receivers, but Gary's just like, oh, another day in the office.
Well, it was kind of amazing to see just how well California's passing. As we get down there, it's a beautiful fall afternoon in Etterick or Petersburg, Virginia, depending on what part of the GPS you read or what directions you follow. probably about 85 to 90 degrees, but it was pretty windy. And if you heard the radio broadcast, you would hear the wind. So watching the warm-ups, you saw the kicker struggle a little bit, and you saw some of the passes flutter. But as soon as the bell rang, as it were, it didn't look like California, especially James Harris, had no problem with the wind.
This is one of those things I think quarterbacks look at as both teams have to deal with it. James is that veteran quarterback with a very, very strong arm. With that baseball background, he can basically cut through. The wind doesn't really bother him too much. And he also uses a glove most of the time on his hand, so he gets that extra grip on the ball as well. He's definitely, last year, broke out as one of those guys. Going into camp, you didn't really know exactly what you had from the first year, but you thought it'd definitely be an improvement. Much to everyone's surprise, I think you saw a 3,000-yard passer. And given his performance week one, he's probably on some of those early Harlan Hill watch lists, I would think, with him and Gary Brown, both the way they played.
Well, I mean, he threw the 2 long touchdown passes were things of beauty because they were just nice, wide receiver gets a step, he puts it on the money, and then the bubble screen to Gary Brown. But I think the best pass he threw all day was a touchdown pass he threw to Luke Smorey. It was just a wheel route, and he put it right over top of the defender's head. And a nice catch, and was able to muscle in for the touchdown. So that's 4 touchdowns the opening game against a tough team. That's a good way to start your season.
I was talking to one of the coaches yesterday when we were in the office, and the defense even knew that play was coming. They called wheel route, and to still put the ball where he did for Luke Smorey to make that catch at that time when the defense, knows a wheel route's probably going to be coming, or look for it at least. That just shows, I think, where he is with this offense. He fully grasped it in his 3rd full year with the program, and basically he's, I think, probably exceeded all expectations of what you were getting a couple years ago when you got a quarterback who hadn't played football since his junior year of high school.
And obviously to throw for that many yards and be that comfortable behind the pocket, you need a good offensive line in front of him. There were some changes on the offensive line this year, but that unit really it didn't look like that was their first real game together. It looked like they had been playing together for years.
I mean, last year, James had the benefit, as the rest of the Vulcans did, with Jack Abercrombie as center, who was named the top center in the country at the Outland Award for D2. So anytime you get that recognition, it's great, but you're also wondering, okay, he's a senior, it's a big hole to fill. Where do we go from there? Well, no big deal for Cal U on the O-line. You lose Reshad Johnson, All-American. Okay, you lose Eric Cush, All-American, drafted in the NFL. Well, they always keep finding these guys on the offensive line to move some guys around here and there, but definitely played the way they needed to. Gave them plenty of time to pass, opened up some run lanes when they needed to. And I think it's a group that's going to only get better as the year goes on with those guys in new parts, new places. I think it's just going to get better the more time they have on field with each other in the game and in practices.
And another group that was completely overhauled in the off season was your specialist, your kicker and your punter. California lost 2 great specialists last year, but it didn't look like they missed a beat this year. No field goal attempts, but 5 for 5. I had to do the math there on extra points and on the few punts. I mean, it looked like business as usual. Good special teams play by the Vulcans.
I think that goes a little bit to Larry Wilson, the idea of special teams coordinator. He's been around with the program for over a decade now. He always gets those guys in position. Whoever it is, kicking and punting, they come in, they develop, they become standout players. Cody Nuzzo from his freshman year to his senior year, huge improvement there. And I think if they get that kind of improvement from William Brazil, they'll be extremely happy. And then Patterson, for punter, has been around the program for a couple years. He's familiar with the game, knows the speed, a Whipwheel product, so he's familiar with Cal U and what it has. But at the same point, I think he was ready for his chance, and it'll be interesting to see how those 2 guys go throughout the whole year.
And the thing that we were noticing, we were talking a little bit on the warm-ups, looks like Brazil has a pretty good leg because he was drilling some 35, 40-yard field goals, but they had some arc on them and they had some accuracy on them.
I mean, you always need to have a kicker. I mean, case in point, this week's upcoming opponent, Cody Nuzzo, really helped that game get to the overtime where you were hoping you had that chance to at least have another possession. Didn't go the right way for the Vulcans, but if you have a guy in your roster who can make a 40, 50-yard field goal, it completely changes the game, and almost did last year against Bloomsburg.
And that pretty much wraps it up. There's no highlights this week because we're not able to go down to Virginia State with TV. We'll be back this coming week with the Bloomsburg game. We'll talk about all that after the break. But after the commercial break, we're going to take a look back at last year's game against this week's opponent, Bloomsburg, and we're going to take a tour around the PSAC with scores, standings, and everything else you'd like to know about Vulcans football. You're watching Vulcans Football 2015 right here on CUTV.
Don't miss your chance to catch the best pro wrestling on the planet. Ring of Honor returns to the Pittsburgh area at the Convo Center at Cal U, Friday, September 25th at 7:30 p.m. with appearances by the Briscoes, Jay Lethal, Adam Cole, and many more. Experience body slamming, super kicking pro wrestling action live. Visit ROHWrestling.com now for tickets and info.
The time is now, the place is here. Stop running, face your fear. When it all come down to this, you only get one shot, can't afford to miss. The time is now, the place is here. Stop running, face your fear. When it all come down to this, you only get one shot, can't afford to miss. So, let's get it, let's go. Go hard or go home.
Since 1937, the Student Association Incorporated, known as SAI, has served the Cal U student body by providing activities, programs, and services. Every enrolled student has the ability to take part in over 125 different clubs and organizations. Managing participation in every SAI activity is easy with OrgSync, a powerful tool for staying connected. Located 1 mile from campus, the SAI farm has 94 acres of meeting and recreational space. SAI, it's your student association. For almost 30 years, CUTV has been the campus and community home for local news, sports, and entertainment. Broadcast in 100,000 homes in southwestern Pennsylvania, CUTV provides complete coverage of Vulcan sports as well as high school football coverage. Broadcast weekly live, CUTV News Center provides coverage of local and campus events, weekend weather, sports highlights, and feature stories. For more information on CUTV, check us out on the web, friend us on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter.
And welcome back to Vulcans Football 2015, your source for all things California Vulcans football in the year 2015. We give it all away in the title, everybody. We're not trying to fool anybody. Once again, I'm your host, Gary Smith, joined, as I am every Tuesday, by Sports Information Director Extraordinaire Matt Kiefer. Matt, we recapped as well as we could without drawings of the Virginia State win. And now, the page turns. There's no rest for the weary. PSAC play starts this week with familiar opponent in the Bloomsburg Huskies.
The Huskies are one of those teams that the Vulcans have faced so much here in the last probably decade or so. It's just one of those things. They're one of the best teams in the East year in, year out. Preseason top 25 this year. Their season didn't start the way they wanted to, or a lot of way I think a lot of people thought it would. They took a loss to Stonehill in the opening week of the year, so they're going to come in. Not too many teams, when you go down 0-2, get a chance to come back and do what you wanted to before the season starts. So they're going to face a very angry, ready-to-go Huskies team, year in, year out. Always one of those teams that run the ball extremely well. But last week, they were held under 100 yards, I think, for the first time since 2011. And that's an offense, I think, it averages over 200 yards a game on the ground each year, no matter who they put in at running back. But I think one of those things, they got some new running backs, a couple of new line pieces. But they still have the veteran quarterback who's been there forever. I swear that Bloomsburg gets those guys like Edinburgh that are there for 4 years, and they're there every single year. But Tim Kelly, I mean, he's one of those guys. He can run a little bit. He has had over 50 touchdown passes in his career, so he's no slouch, so he can throw the ball when he needs to. But if the Vulcans put in the effort they did this week, you'd hope you'd get a nice result coming this week with Bloomsburg.
Well, that was a surprising result last week, and we'll see the scores later. But Bloomsburg losing to Stonehill. We got on the road probably about 3:30 from Virginia State, and Matt, one of our radio announcers, started looking at the scores, and Bloomsburg's down. I'm thinking, well, maybe that's just a typo. And then you start looking at the stats. You said they were held to under 100 yards rushing. Tim Kelly threw 5 interceptions all last year, threw two picks in the first game. On one hand, you got to feel pretty confident that the team might be down, because you always want to play a team when they're down, I guess. But they're a good team, and they're going to be ready for Cal this Saturday.
And their coach has been there. He's his 30 years head coach, but he's been there for almost 15 years under Danny Hale. So he knows the tradition that Bloomsburg has. They're one of those programs that gets at least 7-8 wins every year in the conference, no matter how they start or how they finish. Last year on the defense, I think they led the country in takeaways with 43. So that's a thing. Vulcans, you got to hope they can protect the ball like they did last week, no turnovers. One of those things as a coach, if you have no turnovers and limit the penalties, you always think you have a chance. Vulcans probably won't have too many 90-yard pass plays this week against that kind of a defense and a team that's familiar with Cal. But at the same point, they're going to have some chances. They got to be opportunistic when they get them. They got to make sure they capitalize on them. And you got to be careful on the penalties. It's one of those things you can give up 100 yards in penalty yardage when you're beating a team like they did last week. But you play a good team with a good coach, probably those chances are going to dwindle quite a bit. So you got to take care of the ball and limit the penalties.
And this is a series that it's been close. All the games have been close in the last probably 7 or 8 meetings between the two teams. And this is a game, it seems like last couple of years has factored into events later in the season, whether it be a PSAC championship game appearance or possibly sneaking into the playoffs or keeping a team out of the playoffs. So this is a game that I think both fan bases are going to be up for and both teams are going to be up for.
I actually just looked it up before I came up. 6 of the last 7 times the teams have played, it's been less than a touchdown game. So you know right there, it's going to be one of those things that comes down to the wire probably. Both teams feature a new kicker, so that'll be interesting to see how that plays in this year. But Cal hasn't beaten Bloomsburg at home since 2010, so that's a streak they're looking to snap. But last year's game, they had a chance to really make noise there, but unfortunately for the Vulcans, an INT in overtime really hurts you anytime, especially when you're on offense first. Bloomsburg went on to win, I think, 10 straight games to open the year and put themselves in clear position to be one of the top teams in the region. They were that. They made the PSAC championship a game again, 2nd year in a row, and they also advanced to the regional finals, which is where you always want to be. And it's at that game you got to go 50-50 chance. And ironically, the team that played them in that game also lost this week in the region. So not looking too strong for anybody to run the table, the repeats, running the table this year and going undefeated into that regional championship game.
And last year's game at Bloomsburg, and we're going to look at the highlights here in just a minute. Horrible weather in that game, rain, wind, and you'll see in the highlights. Looks like all 4 seasons were in Bloomsburg last year. But that was a game, and you'll see in the highlights that California was down, but they showed moxie coming back to even force that game into overtime.
I think it's one of those things that catapulted them into the season they had in terms of the success on offense and even the defense picking it up. The offense came back and stormed back the next week against Shippensburg. They just absolutely put up crazy video game type numbers, and the rest of the year, as the year went on, they only got better and better. So they've sort of used, I think, that loss as a launching point from last year and going into this year, that they're still riding that momentum of, okay, let's keep moving on offense and keep up the points, because there's not a lot of teams that can score with the Vulcans when they start playing like they did last Saturday.
And let's take a look back at last year's game. Let's go back in the time machine to Redmond Stadium. And the cold, the wind, and the rain in the overtime thriller last year between California and Bloomsburg. When we come back, we'll talk about the scores and standings all around the PSAC.
Kick is up. And it is good. California gets on the board first, 3-0. Roberson in the backfield. Roberson has enough for a first down. He's in some space. Shakes the defender. Taken down. Ball is out. They're going to... And it's a fumble on the play. Recovered by California. Gets the fumble recovery at the 5-yard line. Looks like that's Spencer Lynn. Recovery. Surratt, high snap. Just falls on, oh no, he does not fall on it. Bloomsburg recovers it for California as Bloomsburg goes in for the touchdown. 13, Alex Dendor. Harris, fumble on the play. See who gets the ball. Bloomsburg fumble, so right after the turns the ball over right. Kelly handed off to Mateo. Side. He's still going outside. He's down 13-3. Mateo, 12-yard run. There's going to be a pass. Fade. Green catches. Great. Green leaping up over. It away. Watched. Fumbled. See who has it. Get the fumble on the. Mateo. The end zone. Harris with receiver Kawan Scott. California back. Scott. Up. Cody Newsom. Overtime here. fakes. Berg. Kick is up. 421 victory. Start their season.
And there you have it, last year's look back at the Bloomsburg 24-21 overtime win at Redmond Stadium. And you saw there at the very end, was it a school record 50-yard field goal to put the game into overtime, and then just a fluke-tipped interception, and California's defense held and forced Bloomsburg to make a pretty substantial kick to win that game and send California home 1-1 to start last year's season.
I mean, it's one of those things that I think you look at it, that streak started a pass of James Harris. I think he went 190-some pass attempts without a pick after that game. So he really took care of the ball. I think he only had like 7 all of last year. So he's a guy who protects the ball. That was one of those things. It's just an exception. When it gets tipped at the line, anything can really happen for it. Unfortunately for the Vulcans, that play happens the first play of overtime when you have the ball first, which really sets up so much pressure on your defense. And the defense did a great job holding Bloomsburg to where they could and make them attempt a field goal. I mean, there's been times with IUP in the series that they've missed those PATs, those field goals in overtime. So you always hope to at least put your defense in a good position in overtime, at least get a couple points on the board. But fortunately for the Vulcans, it didn't happen that day. But they've definitely strung a string. I think it was 6 games in a row they won right after that game. So they used that momentum pretty well after that loss.
I tell you what, looking at the schedule, it always feels like football season's finally here when you get that first PSAC game, whether it's in week 1, 2, or 3. It just seems like, the reality, the situation's here, the season's here, and it's time to buckle up and get ready for the long haul.
I mean, last year was a little bit different, too, with the idea of crossover games counting in the standings. That was the first year in the league it happened. I think enough coaches, administrators, fans got confused, couldn't figure out what was going on, so they switched it back to the way it's always seemingly been, where it's now you're just playing crossover games. They don't affect the standings directly, but indirectly every game always affects the standings one way or another, but it's not so big of a factor that you can't go 1-1 or 0-2 in crossover play. They're only going to count the West games this year, and at that end of those 6-7 weeks, whatever it's going to be, that's how you get your divisional champion to represent you in the PSAC championship game.
Well, let's take a look back at what else happened in the PSAC this past weekend, opening weekend in football. There were some games on Thursday, some games on Saturday, and that was it. That was your choices, Thursday or Saturday. Let's go through it, and I wrote these down in chronological order, and I think there's only 1 or 2 errors in this. I'm getting better at typing it in. St. Joseph's, perennial strong team, beating Edinburgh at Edinburgh 30-10. A rematch of a playoff game last year, Lenore-Rhine beating Westchester 41-28 in a game that was actually it was a lot worse than that for Westchester. They scored a couple late touchdowns to make it closer. Clarion over Lockhaven 40-13.
New coach wins his debut there for Clarion. Offensive coordinator put up some big points there for Clarion. You're not used to seeing this early in the year, especially.
Clarion could be a sleeper team. They could be a team that could give some teams trouble as the season goes on. A game in which it was, I believe, 0-0 or 3-3 at the end of regulation on Thursday night. Ursinus 17, Millersville 9. That's a 5 overtime game.
That is a game it just never seems like it's going to end. When you get to second, third overtime, you just want something to end result of it. And 5 overtimes, that'd be one of the longest you'll see in all NCAA divisions this year.
And there's a CUTV connection to Ursinus. The brother of one of our former sports casters and now meteorologist Josh Eachus, his brother's the defense coordinator at Ursinus. So we sent out some congratulations to him over the internet. Moving on to Saturday games, LIU Post over East Stroudsburg, an old PSAC East rivalry game when LIU Post was in the PSAC East. They squeaked by 41-40. And then you go over to Gannon over Southern Connecticut State. Game that I think was closer than the score was closer than I thought it was going to be when I saw the schedule when it came out.
Gannon's one of those teams, they always seem to have 1 or 2 hiccup games, but for Gannon to make that next step and really become that team that they want to be in their fan base, since they are, they need to get every one of those hiccup games out of the way, and they need to win those games.
Bentley, traveling to Erie, PA, loses to Mercyhurst 35-20, and that's a little scary because it seems like Mercyhurst is a team that traditionally starts slow, takes a couple losses, and then becomes a thorn in everybody's side. So maybe this is the reverse. Maybe they'll start fast and to wane out, but they're a tough team up in Erie.
We're hoping so. I mean, every time we play Mercyhurst, it seems like it's in November, and they always get better as the year progresses. So if they're that good already, it could be trouble for almost every team in the PSAC.
Slippery Rock making the long trip to New Haven, Connecticut, comes back victorious 39-13, defending PSAC champions over there. And continuing on, Shippensburg, it seems like they play Seton Hill the first year every year. Seton Hill had a sad trip back on the Turnpike, 64-14.
It's one of those things. Shippensburg goes for so many years now. It's just been putting up crazy offensive numbers, no matter who's QB, who's running back, and continue to do the same.
Lincoln and Cheney about 10 miles apart, and a little closer than that on the score sheet. Lincoln nipping Cheney 29-22. Assumption and Kutztown in a shootout. Assumption pulling the upset. I think it was a little bit of an upset over Kutztown, 41-37.
Kutztown's the last few years too. They've been able to put up some crazy offensive numbers as well, but not consistently. So they can go for 35 any game. They could also go for 10 or 13. So you never really know what you're getting with the Kutztown team.
And then rounding out the scores, the upset of the week, I believe, Stonehill, the Skyhawks getting a win over the Huskies of Bloomsburg, 27-10.
That's a game there on paper. Everybody's thinking Bloomsburg is going to open up the year with a win, then have a really tough test with Cal here week 2, and then before they go into PSCC East play, where they're picked to win the whole division again, given who they have back at quarterback and a couple big pieces on defense.
And we're going to switch over to the standings. You're going to see just how rough of a week it was for the PSAC East in a second. Here's the PSAC West standings. Of course, no conference games played, but you can see how everyone did in the first week. California, Clarion, Gannon, Mercyhurst, and The Rock all 1-0. Indiana decided to take a knee and not play in week 1. And then Edinburgh and Seton Hill 0-1 with their losses. And moving over to the East, and you see...
No way anybody saw that happening with only one win out of the East. That completely shocked almost, I bet, everybody affiliated with the PSAC.
It was one of the things we were talking about. I didn't even realize it was a one-win week for the PSAC East in non-conference games until you start typing it in, and that's rough. That's a rough way to start.
You always figure at least one of those mid-tier teams is going to get that win because they're going to play somebody that they either at home or somebody that should have a chance of beating. There were a couple games that you should have won, but at the end of the day, Shippensburg is the only team with a W after week 1.
And that puts the wrap up on week 1, and we can look ahead to week 2, as Matt and I have alluded to. Big game this weekend, Saturday at Adamson Stadium. The Bloomsburg Huskies come rolling into town off of a loss to Stonehill. That game will be 1 o'clock, so make sure you get there early. Game should be live on calvulcans.com. Hopefully the web stream will work. We tested it out last week, and as long as no chipmunks or air conditioning problems are in the tech hut, you can log on to calvulcans.com and watch the live CUTV broadcast. You can also listen to the game live on 91.9 FM WCAL, online only, because the transmitter has to come down for everyone's safety up at the stadium. Don't want to have 30,000 watts going off while people are in the stands. You can also watch the CUTV rebroadcast Monday at 6, Tuesday at 4, and early next week you can, if you want to watch it online in almost HD quality, you can watch our rebroadcast at CUTV Sports 1 off of YouTube. So if you miss this game and say you can't find it, then shame on you, because there's literally, I think, 9 ways. It's like scoring a run at third base without a hit. There's like 9 ways of doing it. Same thing watching the Vulcan games. There's like 9 ways of doing it.
A run's a run, so if any way you follow the game, feel free. calvulcans.com/watch, new website this year, and it's free for all fans. No more pay-per-view packages, subscriptions, and anything to manage. So it's all going to be free this year. calvulcans.com/watch.
And we're excited about that, and hope if you can't make it to Adamson Stadium Saturday, you can watch it online. But obviously, if you can, get to Adamson Stadium, make it a great home atmosphere for the Vulcans, and hopefully we can cheer them on to a 2-0 start over Bloomsburg. For Matt Keifer, I'm Gary Smith. You've been watching Vulcans Football 2015.